Hi there, it's just gone 4 o'clock. Welcome to Brazier, fast-paced news from 4 until 6. Some questions for you this afternoon. Has Wales declared war on parents, or has it just fallen into line with Scotland when it comes to smacking children? We'll debate how and why the home nations of Britain now divide on corporal punishment. Also, why does the BBC insist on calling a male serial killer who decapitated his latest elderly victim a woman? It's politically correct, but in what way is it a fair reflection of reality? Brendan O'Neill joins me. And why did America's best-selling plane fall out of the sky this morning, killing all 130 on board and puzzling aviation experts the world over? Alongside me throughout the next 2 hours, the author Ella Whelan to look at all those stories. But first, we have the headlines for you.
Good afternoon, it's 4:01. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has thanked those involved in her release after spending 6 years detained in Iran, but she's refused to thank the Foreign Secretary. Speaking for the first time publicly since being released, she questioned why it took 5 Secretaries of State for her to be freed. She also said the meaning of freedom to her will not be complete until Morad Tabaz and other dual nationals are reunited with their families. The British Iranian landed back in Britain last Thursday after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s.
I was told many times that, oh, we're going to get you home. That never happened. So there was a time that I felt like, do you know what? I'm not even going to trust you because I've been told many times that I'm going to be taken home. But that never happened. I mean, how many foreign secretaries does it take for someone to come home? 5? It should have been one of them eventually. So now here we are. What's happened now should have happened 6 years ago.
Ukraine has refused to surrender in the port city of Mariupol, which has been surrounded by Russian forces since the early days of the invasion. Russia had given fighters in the city until 5 a.m. this morning to lay down their weapons in exchange for safe passage out, but they refused. Thousands of residents are trapped with little food, power and water. Ukraine's Defence Minister, Alexei Reznikov, has warned that Russia is conducting state terrorism.
Thousands and thousands of civilians were killed. Russia is now committing a real act of genocide against the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. For 3 weeks, 400,000 citizens have been surrounded, without food, water, light, heat.
At least 8 people have been killed after a missile hit a shopping centre in Ukraine's capital, Kyiv. A video from Ukraine's State Emergency Service shows a large blast in the northwest suburbs of the city. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko has said shelling hit residential houses and a shopping district. He's also announced a 35-hour curfew in Kyiv starting tonight.
The enemy continues to attack the capital. During the night, rescuers have been putting out a fire in the Podilsky district for a long time, where a shopping centre burned down and 6 residential buildings were damaged as a result of the shelling. 3 of them, unfortunately, are no longer livable. 8 people were killed. The premises of 2 schools and 2 kindergartens were also damaged.
In the Ukrainian city of Kherson, CCTV footage has captured the moment Russian troops opened fire on protesters to disperse them. Ukraine's armed forces say stun grenades and gunfire were used to disperse hundreds of civilians taking part in the rally. Russia did not immediately comment on the incident. State media in China are reporting there's no sign of survivors from an airliner that crashed in the country with 132 people on board. The Boeing 737 jet crashed into mountains in the southern province of Guangxi, causing a fire on the mountainside. Media have quoted firefighters saying there was no sign of life among the scattered debris. China Eastern Airlines say the cause of the crash is under investigation. A man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had researched and planned potential attacks on other politicians, including at the home of Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, a court has heard today. The Conservative MP for Southend West was meeting with constituents in a church building in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex last October when he was fatally stabbed. Ali Harbi Ali has appeared at the Old Bailey and denies murder and preparing terrorist acts. Protests are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O Ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O Ferries to pause the changes and says it's examining the contracts it holds with them. Lee is one of the workers sacked by P&O Ferries. Speaking to GB News, he's called for government intervention.
We were told it was a job for life, second generation seafarer, my father was a seafarer, and now obviously the rug's been pulled from under us. We've been replaced by agency labour from Ukraine, from Romania, from Poland and India. We need political support, political will to get, first of all, P&O's ships impounded, to remove all government contracts from DP World, and to get support from myself and my colleagues here. We've done nothing wrong. We were sacked for what? For being loyal, for doing our jobs. This can't be right.
This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to Brazier.
Hi there, 6 minutes past 4. Coming up in a moment, we're going to debate whether there can ever be justification for slapping a child, that in view of the fact that in Wales it is now illegal. But first, we'll just touch base with what's happening in Ukraine today. Russian Navy vessels have shelled the port city of Odessa on Ukraine's southern coast. That raises the possibility in the minds of several that the invasion could see Ukraine landlocked, effectively. We're joined by Major General Chip Chapman, former head of counter-terrorism at the MOD. Chip Chapman, appreciate your time, as ever. The Russians do seem to be making a fist of trying to cut Ukraine off by sea.
They do. They've got too many axes. So in order to take Odessa, you really need to take Mykolaiv and have a land and amphibious landing at the same time, and to have Kherson potentially as a logistic base which you can resupply both to the east and the west. That doesn't look like they are capable of doing that at the moment. So you would say that that is still stalled. You'd say that Kyiv access is still stalled, and you would probably say that they're more successful in the Donbass. So the key question really is, are they in an operational pause and have to resupply in most of their theatres, or are they in a position of culminating when they can go no further? And the answer to that gives you the potential for what will happen in the future, be it either a negotiation or a ceasefire.
How much does it change things if Ukraine can't get stuff out of its ports? I mean, we read, don't we, that when it comes to the wheat harvest, I'm not sure there will be a wheat harvest in Ukraine in any measurable sense this year, but they are massive exporters to large parts of the world, aren't they, the Ukrainians, of wheat. If they don't have ports, and I'm guessing shipping's the way that wheat's exported rather than by road, the world is going to feel that.
It is. So essentially the Black Sea and the Sea of Azov become almost a Russian lake. So that becomes a key negotiating factor. Now, it doesn't, in the sense that Ukraine doesn't look like it's going to give up its territorial sovereignty of Ukraine, and neither should it if you look at the conventions which Russia has negated in its invasion, both as, for example, the Budapest Memorandum of 94 and the Helsinki Agreement of 75. I think we need to really look at the structure of the theatre of operations, which from a Russian perspective includes both Ukraine, Belarus and the west of Russia in terms of the railheads to resupply. So left bank Ukraine, that is the bit to the east of the Dnieper, really is the close battle for Russia in theatre war terms. The deep battle which we're seeing is to the west of Ukraine, where you do have what I would consider to be the only legitimate targeting going on in certain circumstances, such as, for example, in Lviv, the aircraft repair factory and the attack on Yavorov, which, of course, was a hub both for the resupply into Ukraine and potentially for the Western foreign fighters coming in to resupply the Ukrainian forces.
That is Major General Chip Chapman. Chip Chapman, thanks for your time. Thanks a lot. Now, this morning, a Boeing passenger jet was on a normal internal commuter flight in China. There were 123 passengers and 9 crew on board as it flew at 29,000 feet. Actually, opinions vary on that. It could have been 31,000, not clear, but high. For no apparent reason, the aircraft entered a steep dive, and the pictures that are on screen now, apologies if you're listening on the radio, but they show a steep dive of a 737, and neither in a tailspin nor breaking up, but arrowing towards the Earth, almost vertically and at very high speed, put at around 350 miles per hour or knots, I suppose. But the reason for the crash isn't yet known. But given that the 737 is by some measures the best-selling passenger plane in aviation history, well, it's a question the travel industry, it is opening up this summer post-COVID, and you, the flying public everywhere, will be looking to answer. Possible causes at this stage, including a high-altitude stall, jammed controls, sensor failure of some description, and a deliberate act of sabotage or terrorism cannot be ruled out, obviously. It's not thought an engine failure caused the crash, given that an aircraft can glide some distance without power. The plane, operated by China Eastern Airways, involved a 737, but not the 737 MAX variant, much discussed, which was grounded, you'll remember, around the world following 2 fatal crashes. Let's turn to a retired air accident investigator, Steve Moss, who joins me now. Steve Moss, appreciate your time. And obviously we'll start by saying this is only just happened and we are well into the realms of speculation, but there's a public interest in that speculation given how much of a workhorse in aviation this type of plane is.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the most commonly used passenger aircraft, I think, in the world. So it's pretty important that they find out what's been going on.
Seen footage, I mean, we can't verify it, nor do we have any reason to disbelieve it, footage of an aircraft diving towards Earth. How unusual is that kind of crash in the context of aviation jets, not breaking up in air nor in some kind of tailspin, but really arrowing towards the Earth? Does that tell you anything?
Well, I wouldn't like to say at this stage that there hasn't been a mid-air breakup. I think it would be quite an explanation, quite a reasonable explanation. I've never seen anything quite like this. The information that I've seen online indicates that it was flying quite normally, straight and level, just constant speed, and then just almost instantaneously goes into this steep, high rate of descent dive towards the ground. So, I would, first thing that I would want to do if I was an investigator on the site is check that we have all 4 corners of the aeroplane actually on the site and that we're not looking at a missing chunk, and it would have to be a fairly sizable chunk of the aeroplane further away back down the flight path.
Some suggestion that the sizable chunk that may be involved could be the tail fin.
Well, I was struck. I mean, it's obviously a very poor and distant image of the aircraft as it dives into the ground, but it looked as though maybe it might have just been the angle that the video was taken from. It looked to me as though I didn't really see a vertical stabilizer, or what we call the fin. It looked like a missile rather than an aeroplane. So I'd want to check that that or any other part of the aeroplane didn't detach in flight. It would be extremely unusual for an aircraft this new. I think it was in 2015 it was delivered, modern generation aircraft, to have an in-flight breakup. But it has, things like that have happened. But very, very unusual in my 35 years as an accident investigator. I don't think I've seen anything quite like it.
Steve Moss, I read, you say it's only 6 or 7 years old. I read it's, far more than most of us about this sort of thing, that it's the 737-89P variant, but it's not the 737 MAX, which I mentioned in the introduction there, was troubled.
Yes, the 737 MAX did have a lot of problems, some of them inherent in the design. But this wouldn't fit it anyway. It isn't the same design. The architecture of the control system isn't the same as the 800 series. What appears to happen from the recordings would indicate it isn't one of the 737 MAX, which would be characterised by sort of fairly dramatic changes in speed and altitude before it hit the ground. So it's quite unique in my experience.
And you can see, and this touches on the business that you're in, Steve Moss. I mean, you can see why people want to get to the bottom of what happened in a crash like this as quickly as possible. I mean, obviously the Chinese do. It's we presume, mainly their nationals involved who've lost their lives. You can see why anybody's involved in aviation, even the holidaymakers who use these planes want to know. But also the manufacturers, Boeing, will want to know. Their share price fell by 6% today because of this crash.
Yes, well, I think coming on top of the woes of the 737 MAX, that doesn't surprise me. What will happen, I'm absolutely sure, is that the protocol in such cases of international accidents is that the National Transportation Safety Board will appoint one of their people as an accredited representative, and he will travel, or he should be travelling to China, to the site, accompanied by a team from Boeing who will supply the expertise from a Boeing technical point of view to the investigation, and that they should work as a team. Of course, one of the things they'll be wanting to do, of course, is to recover the flight recorders, assuming that this is a very high-speed impact. So there's a distinct possibility of damage to one or both of the flight recorders, the so-called black boxes. So there may be a delay in reading those out while the damage is repaired or the data is transferred in slow time. So there may not be any quick answers.
No, but it's one of those subjects which is important to ventilate quickly, isn't it? Because people are concerned as they are preparing to fly at any time. But with the summer holiday season, all looming, I suppose. Steve Moss, really appreciate your time. Thanks very much indeed for your expertise.
My pleasure.
Ella Whelan is alongside me throughout the course of the next 2 hours or thereabouts. And Ella, we're going to start with a couple of stories. Leah Thomas, the swimmer, and I don't know if we've got the image. I do hope we have. If we haven't, people will have seen it, I imagine, in some numbers. What am I talking about? I'm talking about the podium finish for these swimmers. What's the story that it tells?
Well, there have been several cases of athletes who identify, male-bodied athletes who identify as women, trans women, engaging in women's sport and beating women. And there's been a number of cases of this. But I think the reason why Leah Thomas's involvement in college swimming and her thrashing of everyone else in the pool has become such a talking point is because of that podium picture in which...
Apologies to people who are listening on radio, and actually it didn't matter because we've not been showing it anyway, but there's still images. But just to describe the image.
Because what's noticeable about it is the obvious upset in the other competitors' eyes. While they've been extremely sportsmanlike and polite about it, there is no doubt that the involvement of Leah Thomas in that particular race meant that some young women who had been training for many years at a shot at engaging in that race were prevented. And indeed, if you watch any of the footage of Leah's involvement in those races, it's very clear that she has a very obvious physical advantage over the other female counterparts. And I think it's really brought to the fore the discussion about fairness in sport, because I think most people will agree that in almost all other forms of life, whether it be social, work, wherever, how someone identifies, either male or female, whatever, what they want to wear, what they want to call themselves, what their first name is, most people don't mind and are very polite about that. But in the realm of very specific things like sport, which is about physical ability. It's not about how you feel in the pool. It's about what your body can do in the pool. It would seem to me pretty stupid to suggest that putting someone who has gone through male puberty and is indeed a physically enjoying the advantages that a male body gives you would be allowed to compete with women who have gone through puberty as girls, and that just isn't fair. And I think however you feel about the kind of gender war discussion about pronouns and all of that stuff, when it comes to the physicality of sport, this is obviously very clear-cut.
Let's just talk about, I don't spend much time praising the BBC, but the BBC's Little Britain was a breakthrough comedy series that's now controversial. What's happening to it?
Well, this is a really funny instance of what can happen when you try to censor, because Little Britain got axed off of BritBox and iPlayer and all, different kind of channels, I think it was in 2020, because of David Walliams blackfacing up as Desiree DeVere.
Was that the only reason?
It was because of, I mean, the thing about Little Britain is there is no sketch in it that isn't problematic, to use that awful word. There is, racist jokes in it, and I mean, I suppose Walliams and Lucas would argue that they're not advocating racism; they're trying to send up racism in their portrayals of it. There's stuff about women in there. There's, you name it. The whole point of Little Britain, actually,
they're ladies. Look, they're ladies. Didn't it actually? We were talking about this in the newsroom. Well, I was talking about it. The people listening to me. I was saying this foreshadowed so much of what then became the culture wars, didn't it? This comedy.
Yes,
this series.
It was pretty. I mean, in particular, things like the Only Gay in the Village sketch, which was sort of highlighting it was the suggestion that there was a lot of bleating coming from the LGBT community about how put upon they were, and actually, like the bartender, no one really cared and was fine with it. But the thing that Walliams and Lucas have done now is that they've taken out some of the scenes. So I think it's the blackface scene and maybe a few others. But they've left the rest in the hopes that will sort of ingratiate them to the cancel culture crowd. And of course it hasn't, because they've still got in, a racist joke about Chinese people. They've still got in the stuff that I hated, which was the kind of anti-working class Vicky Pollard stuff. That all of that's still in there. But I think they've done a great job of proving how you can never, ever please everyone with censorship. So let it be a lesson to them. I completely
forgot about Vicky Pollard. You're right, they got to everybody, didn't they?
Yeah.
For now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, a serial killer accused of killing their girlfriend for the third time, described as an elderly woman in numerous articles because they recently identified as a woman. We're on a similar theme. I suppose we've touched on this before. Brendan O'Neill will talk to me about why he thinks women are being blamed for the crimes of men. First, we'll have a look at the weather.
Hello again, welcome to the latest from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. A dry and bright day for most of us. Cloudier skies in the west compared to how things were at the weekend, but even under those clouds, it's mostly fine. We're on the edge of high pressure. That high pressure is sitting to the east. A southerly airflow is bringing in some areas of cloud. Initially, it's been across western parts of the country, but that cloud overnight drifting east, and then another plume of cloud turning up from the south. And that could give the odd shower to southern parts of England and then later through central areas. However, really, for the vast majority, it's looking dry overnight with clear spells in places, the longest clear spells in the north of Scotland, where temperatures could dip to -3°C by dawn. A chilly start with a touch of frost in places for the start of Tuesday, but for most, it's a bright start. So just this area of medium level cloud moving north through the Midlands into northern England, and by the afternoon, as temperatures rise, that could set off the odd shower, mainly northern England, North Midlands, southern Scotland. But away from those areas, it's sunny spells, it's staying dry, and temperatures reaching 16 to 18°C fairly widely, 19 or 20 possible London to Cambridge. Then Tuesday night sees any cloud generally fizzle out, and I think with extensive clear spells through the night, a touch of frost is possible in sheltered spots just about anywhere, and a few fog patches as well, predominantly northeast and eastern England. Otherwise, another sunny start to the day on Wednesday. Widespread sunshine, more extensively, I think, compared to Monday and Tuesday. Barely a cloud in the sky in places, once any fog has lifted, of course, and it's going to stay dry virtually everywhere. Thursday brings more cloud to Scotland and Northern Ireland, but sunshine prevails elsewhere. Very similar again on Friday.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, another question. Are women being blamed for the crimes of men? Last week, it was widely reported, including by our very own BBC, that an elderly woman had killed and decapitated another elderly woman in New York. Sad to say, lots of women are murdered, but rarely by other women, certainly not in circumstances this macabre. Well, this crime sounded almost unbelievable. And indeed, that's because it was. What really happened was not that an elderly woman murdered another old lady. In reality, the killer was a biological man, what we used to call a man. And the woman he killed was his girlfriend. Well, does it matter that many of the people who read about this story left it thinking that it was a female-on-female killing? Well, consider this. The murderer, who now identifies as a woman, had killed before. In a previous trial, he admitted to having a problem with women. With this third and particularly violent murder, it was obvious that he was a serial killer, and yet anyone reading about this vile crime would think it was a woman, not a man, who was responsible. GB News exclusively revealed this morning that the BBC has been forced to admit they edited their report into the case twice, as their original article made no reference at all to the sex of the killer. Let's turn to the chief political writer at Spiked, Brendan O'Neill, who joins me. Brendan, can I start with another quote? It's from Ed West, the writer who wrote this week on Twitter about the story, and he attached the BBC article about it. And he wrote, "Whenever I now read about a woman committing a horrific crime, especially the sort of crime women almost never commit, I just start at the end of the article."
Yes, very sensible, because if they do mention the sex of the killer or the person who committed the crime, it tends to be at the very end of the article. And I read these pieces. I read a New York Times piece about this. I read the BBC piece. And I was really shocked. The idea that an 83-year-old woman would kill another woman and dismember her and discard her body parts around town. That's what happened in Brooklyn in this alleged murder. I thought, 83-year-old women don't do that. That is presumably unheard of for an 83-year-old woman to summon up the strength and the wickedness to do something like that. And of course, as you say, it wasn't an 83-year-old woman. It was an 83-year-old man who identifies as a woman and who has previously killed women, one in the 1960s and one in the 1980s. So this is a male serial killer who the New York Times and the BBC decided that they would respect his gender pronouns, respect his sexual identity, and refer to him in the way that he wants to be referred to. So they were elevating the feelings of a male serial killer over the truth of what happened to the woman he allegedly killed in Brooklyn recently.
Occasionally, Brendan, I'll come across local newspaper, regional newspaper articles in this country. There was one recently, I tried to draw attention to it on Twitter about a fortnight ago. It was a Scottish newspaper and a woman who flashed her penis at passers-by, and I thought that doesn't sound right. No, I retweeted it. Now, I'm a bit more sympathetic to somebody who's working, and a harassed, hard-pressed local newspaper reporter, maybe having to churn out half a dozen, if not a dozen, stories every single day. Doesn't really fancy a fight with somebody on Twitter. Let's just take the line of least resistance. But the BBC, grown-up publications in America, what's going on?
Yeah, it's completely unacceptable in my view, and it's becoming increasingly Orwellian because the New York Times headline about this killing in New York City was essentially a lie. It said she has been arrested for killing women before and now she's being arrested again. All of those words are untrue. This is not a she, this is a he. So they are lying to us. They are so captured by the woke ideology and so captured by the cult of transgenderism that they're now elevating ideology above truth. And you talk about news stories where they say things like flashed her penis. I think we have to start saying that the phrase her penis makes no sense. That's an illogical phrase. Those two words don't go together. And it's only under the ideology of transgenderism where there is this belief that you must respect the pronouns of everyone, including criminals. It's only under that ideology that you can have nonsensical phrases like that. It is very Orwellian to rearrange language in this kind of way. And I think that's increasingly what's happening with this issue in particular.
Brendan O'Neill, for now. Brendan, thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan is alongside me to reflect on this one. It's one thing where criminal cases are involved to hang tough and say, I'm not going to go along with this linguistic bullying. It's another thing if you work for a big British company and you say to your HR department, I'm not going to go along with this. You might lose your job.
Well, we know that in particular with the BBC, there have been some questions, if we can put it that way, about the freedom of staff and employees to be able to, not to be able to use what pronouns they like, but to be able to question the use of pronouns in emails and things like that. There was a great documentary, Nolan Investigates, that looked into the BBC's relationship with, for example, lobby groups like Stonewall. But I mean, I think Brendan makes a really key distinction there between how we treat special cases like criminals and how we treat your average individual. Because one of the things that trans activists talk about when they criticise people like me or Brendan who are raising questions about the sort of blanket use of pronouns for anyone who decides today that they want to be a different gender, is they say, well, what you're doing is you're painting all trans people as murderers or all trans people as perverts. And the problem actually is that by not distinguishing between individuals like this who openly admit that they have a problem with women, it's quite obvious to anyone. You don't have to have a PhD in criminology to suggest that he might be using this desire to self-ID for not legitimate reasons. The inability to make a distinction between that and your average person who wants to change their gender and whatever and is no problem to society does perpetuate this idea of there being something wrong with trans people, of being there something suspect. We're not making that distinction. Very, very similar thing happened in Canada with an individual who called herself a trans woman and then was a man who went on to serially sexually harass lots of immigrant workers in beauty salons. And it wasn't until the very end of that case that the biological sex was revealed of that individual. And so, but just on a very basic point, which Brendan has made many times, is that if you're a journalist and if you're delivering news, your key objective has to be getting the facts out there or the opinion, whatever you're reporting on, in the quickest, most easiest, most accessible way. And there's a real kind of elitist amount of sort of academising around this, where people, sort of suggest that they would have to talk in flowery language about gender and complicate things.
What it is, Ella. People are writing for their peers and their contemporaries. They're not writing for customers anymore, which is a vexed question if you work at the BBC, because your relationship with the customers is confused by the licence fee. Another subject for another time. For now, Ella, thanks very much. After the break, it's time for our debate. We're asking today, should smacking kids be legal? But first, we'll bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Tammy.
Colin, thank you. It's 4:35. Here are the latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Well, we can start with some breaking news, and detectives investigating alleged lockdown-busting parties held in Downing Street in the Cabinet Office have begun interviewing key witnesses. The Prime Minister is one of over 100 people who were asked to fill out a questionnaire under caution as part of Operation Hillman. As yet, no referrals have been made for the issuing of fixed penalty notices. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has thanked those involved in her release after spending 6 years detained in Iran. But she refused to thank the Foreign Secretary. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe landed back in Britain last week after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s. A man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had researched and planned potential attacks on other politicians, including cabinet ministers, a court has heard. Harbi Ali has appeared at the Old Bailey and denies the allegations of murder and preparing terrorist acts. A Chinese plane with 132 people on board crashed in the southern province of Guangxi after a sudden descent from cruising altitude. State media in China report there is no sign of survivors. China's Eastern Airlines say the cause of the crash is under investigation. Protests are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O Ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O Ferries to pause the changes and says it's examining the contracts it holds with them. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Brazier in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon
and Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, I dare say a few phone-ins today have been filled with this particular topic, but I make no apology for going back to it or presenting it to you for the first time today, if you've not been listening to the radio. How easy is it to reason with a toddler who wants to let go of mummy's hand and run off towards the danger of a busy road, or maybe daddy's hand? It's one of the arguments that's been advanced in recent years by parents fearful that what their parents and grandparents took for granted was about to be criminalised. It's an argument that no longer cuts any ice. In Wales, from today, any type of corporal punishment, that includes slapping and smacking, it will become illegal. The defence hitherto of reasonable punishment, some call it reasonable chastisement, will be gone. Joining me here in the studio, Ella Whelan, and the broadcaster and journalist Sam Dowler, to put a different perspective on this one. Sam, thanks for taking up the opportunity to present the case for Scotland and now Wales. So the United Kingdom is divided on this. How did we get here?
Well, I mean, they might be divided, but not by that much. The NSPCC did a survey of 3,000 people in England and found that 64% said that the law should change over here, and 68% said that it was unacceptable to hit a child. I mean, I can't imagine anybody being for beating a child. I mean,
no, Sam, the language is really important here, isn't it? Nobody for a second is defending, in quotes, beating a child. I think what they're saying, and I don't want to steal some of Ella's best lines, but is the example I cite in my introduction there, a mum or a dad walking alongside the road, toddler, who you can't reason with, by the way, I know this, makes a dart for the traffic. You're panic-stricken, you love that child, and you, in that moment, that loss of control, but also instinctively wanting to teach them a lesson that might save their life in the future, you slap the back of their calves. That is not...
But I do, of course, think that, that is such a rarefied situation. If your child is in danger of running into the road, I mean, I was hit as a child, and I remember getting a spanking of a lifetime when I tried to run into a bonfire, which I did do for some reason as a toddler, and obviously I got the smacking of a lifetime in situations, whether it's life or death, fair enough, I think, but obviously. I've seen people in a supermarket. Listen to what I'm saying. I'm saying in a supermarket, for example, when you see a mother or a father admonish their child, whacking them on the legs, that isn't acceptable anymore. Times have changed, and obviously the situation of life or death. I'm sure if that got to the courts, then there might obviously be some leniency.
Ella, where's the line? Where is it acceptable? Because there is a line, isn't there? I mean, Sam's made it clear there is a line. Whether it's a line that will be recognised by a court, I don't know. What do you think?
We should have very clear laws, and we did previously have very clear laws, in England, Scotland and Wales about violence, about harassment, and indeed about child protection. I mean, there's a lot lacking in relation to child protection, and some of the horror stories we've seen of late in relation to children like baby pee and things like that show that there is room for improvement. But let's get this straight. This law is not about preventing serious bodily harm or child abuse. It's about making a judgment call on parents, which I think is both unwarranted and dangerous. The vast majority of times in which a parent will physically interact, if you want to call it that, with their child is out of love. Parents get a real drubbing in this kind of conversation. There's a suggestion that they're walking around waiting for the moment to wallop their kid, and that is absolutely not the case. And who is anyone else to decide in a supermarket, for example, whether or not a child needs to be disciplined? I think that there is, it's in relation to toddlers, you're very right, that the way in which they behave doesn't often respond to reason, and a tap or a smack or a fright, which is really what you're trying to say. You're trying to give them a fright to make them understand the seriousness of what they're doing and the consequences of what they're doing is a tried and tested method. I mean, anecdote isn't often useful in relation to this, and we've had surveys quoted and things like that. But anecdotal evidence in this, I think, is important, which is that everyone, at least in my generation and previous generations, will have had parents who have, out of love and protection, given them a smack sometimes, and not just when their life's been in danger, but when they've been a little rip and they need to know not to do that. And I think that there is a sort of a desire to kind of make parenting into this science these days, which is, you have to read the manuals, you have to, apply to the kind of guidance that the government gives you. And in fact, it's not sort of celebrating old wives' tales, but there is a certain amount of knowledge passed on through generations of how to raise children that I think these kind of laws eradicate, and I think these kind of laws damage, because what we're doing is we're saying to parents, don't just be watching your kid, watch over your shoulder at the busybody in the supermarket aisle who's watching you.
And on that point about the danger of there being a sort of culture of denunciation, Sam, is not the point that actually the unforeseen side effect of this, byproduct of this, might be, I mean, you talk about kids being beaten, there's a scene in the supermarket. Surely what some bad parents will do, and there are good parents, there are bad parents, is they'll say, wait till you get home. And that's exactly what will happen. You will drive this underground, because the kind of parent who ritualistically beats their child will just take them home and do it away from any prying eyes.
Well, I mean, I don't really see how that is the same sort of thing. I mean, like this sort of law, I would imagine it's for, it's all very well for us to say, oh, it's a nanny state, etc., and it is more to do with habitual hitting of a child, I would say, and for to be reported, bruising, that sort of thing. I mean, my parents, for example, obviously, it was a different age then, and my mum was hit with a wooden spoon, or my dad with a belt. But obviously, then in her generation, I was just hit with hands. But I remember it. I remember it being. I don't remember it being effective as in making me behave myself. I remember it as in, like, why would my loving parent want to hurt me? We use our words now. We use our words to reason and to maybe take toys away, or to take away screen time. That's what they do these days, and that's far more effective. And in the long run, as well as right then at the time.
Ella, I'm not sure. I mean, when I've some of the violence I've seen meted out at home has been between my own children, sort of sibling on sibling, and you try and stop it, but it's quite difficult. So violence, in quotes, violence comes in different forms, doesn't it? Ella, just muse on this one, if you would. When this story's been reported today about Wales criminalising smacking, it's often in the context of the fact that it's joining 60 other countries in the world that have criminalised smacking. And it's presented as this sort of, with this air of historical inevitability, and you don't want to be on the wrong side of history, which I think is a really clever campaigning ploy. But it's a campaigning ploy.
Yes, I mean, it's not insignificant that Wales is following Scotland. Scotland having a government and policies within that government of some of the most draconian and restrictive anti-freedom measures that we've seen for years. The SNP has been to blame for cracking down on free speech, on parental freedom, on people doing all kinds of things that you should be able to do in a free society. And it is important to say that in a free society in which we respect parental authority, you should have the right to discipline your child as you see fit within the remits of normal law. So that's not causing bruising, that's not causing grievous bodily harm or child abuse. It's disciplining your child as you see fit. I think it's one of the most toxic conversations around parenting that's thrown up has been this idea that children should have a greater say over how they're raised and how they're disciplined than parents. And what that has led to is a very big problem with discipline in schools and in other areas of life, and with lots of very unhappy children who don't know who's the boss. I think one of the important things about smacking, but also, the other speaker is right, words, and actually engaging with your child and telling them who's got the authority, because most parents do the job with words, by the way. It's not like everyone's just suddenly resorting to clipping them around the ear. That's a last resort. But it's to assert the fact and give parents the confidence to be able to say, I am in charge here, and most importantly, you're safe because I'm in charge here. And once you break down that relationship between parents and kids with the intervention of the state, call it nanny state if you like or whatever, but then that actually damages that relationship and that trust between child and parent, and I think that's why this law is so problematic.
Sam Dowler, 15 seconds or 20 seconds left thereabouts. England will follow in Wales's footsteps, you think?
Yeah, I do. As I said, in the NSPCC survey, 68% already think it's not acceptable. 64% want the law to change. I mean, it's not going to go down; it's going to go up. So I do think it will happen here as well.
Sam Dowler and Ella Whelan, who's here in the studio. Thanks both for that one. Coming up, we're going to be joined by the man leading the effort to document Vladimir Putin's crimes and then bring them to court. First, though, we've got to look at the weather.
Hello again, welcome to the latest from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. A dry and bright day for most of us. Cloudier skies in the west compared to how things were at the weekend, but even under those clouds, it's mostly fine. We're on the edge of high pressure. That high pressure is sitting to the east. A southerly airflow is bringing in some areas of cloud. Initially, it's been across western parts of the country, but that cloud overnight drifting east and then another plume of cloud turning up from the south. And that could give the odd shower to southern parts of England and then later through central areas. However, really, for the vast majority, it's looking dry overnight with clear spells in places, the longest clear spells in the north of Scotland, where temperatures could dip to -3°C by dawn. A chilly start with a touch of frost in places for the start of Tuesday, but for most, it's a bright start. So just this area of medium level cloud moving north through the Midlands into northern England. And by the afternoon, as temperatures rise, that could set off the odd shower, mainly northern England, North Midlands, southern Scotland. But away from those areas, it's sunny spells, it's staying dry, and temperatures reaching 16 to 18°C fairly widely, 19 or 20 possible London to Cambridge. Then Tuesday night sees any cloud generally fizzle out, and I think with extensive clear spells through the night, a touch of frost is possible in sheltered spots just about anywhere, and a few fog patches as well, predominantly northeast and eastern England. Otherwise, another sunny start to the day on Wednesday. Widespread sunshine, more extensively, I think, compared to Monday and Tuesday. Barely a cloud in the sky in places, once any fog has lifted, of course, and it's going to stay dry virtually everywhere. Thursday brings more cloud to Scotland and Northern Ireland, but sunshine prevails elsewhere. Very similar again on Friday.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're on the money.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
Right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, we haven't spent a lot of time talking about Ukraine today, but there's something that perhaps in years to come is going to become a real talking point, a real issue of substance. And it revolves around this question: could Putin's invasion of Ukraine lead to a Nuremberg-style war crimes trial. The International Criminal Court recently began investigating after 40 countries referred the the tragedy, to the prosecutor. Biden recently called Putin a war criminal, and the UN Human Rights Council is also setting up an investigative commission. Well, we're joined by Professor David Crane, who is the founding chief prosecutor for the UN Special Court for Sierra Leone and who's been collecting direct evidence against Putin for a subsequent war crimes tribunal. Professor, thanks for your time. We often hear it said, and have heard it said a lot in recent weeks, that might is right. You can have all the legal questions you like, but if you can't bring the other guy to book, it matters not a jot.
Let me tell you right now to your listeners, the rule of law is more powerful than the rule of the gun. So yes, might seem to may be right, but not in 2022. In fact, for the past 20 years, we have been building the experience, the law, and the rules of procedure to take down anybody who is killing others just because they can. So, we do now have the capability to prosecute Vladimir Putin, his commanders, and all those who are committing international crimes.
Professor, what is the burden of proof? I mean, we sort of assume it's almost a slam dunk, open and shut case. How much of a moot point would it be in a court that he's committed war crimes?
Well, it's important. These aren't kangaroo courts. These are courts of law. And so we have rules of procedure and evidence. The prosecutor, I was a UN prosecutor and took down and prosecuted President Charles Taylor of Liberia. It requires that prosecutor to prove each and every element of each crime beyond a reasonable doubt. So it is just the same burden as a Queen's Counsel in London trying to prove a case. The bottom line is that we have to make sure that it's a fair and open trial so that the world can understand that no one is above the law, but the law is also more powerful than the rule of the gun. So, it is a process. It's a legal process, but one that we can do.
How easy is it to internationalize that process? I mean, clearly sometimes a country sees it almost as a slight on its nationhood for it to be internationalized. What do I mean by that? Well, I think back to what happened to Saddam Hussein. I'm sure an International Criminal Tribunal would have been very interested in trying him. They never got the chance. And that might happen with Putin.
Well, it's interesting. We are proceeding under the law. We are building a case effectively to prosecute Vladimir Putin for the crime of aggression, war crimes, and crimes against humanity. That is an appropriate legal process. Time is not of essence, though we are moving forward. And when the time comes, when we have an appropriate tribunal set up to prosecute him, which is being discussed as we speak, along with our friends at the International Criminal Court, then we will prosecute him. He doesn't, we will investigate and indict Vladimir Putin for his crimes. He doesn't have to physically be present. He becomes an indicted war criminal. And your viewers have to understand there is no statute of limitations for these international crimes. And so once he has committed those crimes and he is found under an indictment that he has committed those, then he is an indicted war criminal for the rest of his life. And someday there will be an appropriate political moment by which the world will hand Vladimir Putin over to us. But we don't have trials in absentia either. So, but it doesn't stop us from doing this. Happened with President Charles Taylor. I indicted him, and they didn't hand him over to us for 2 years. And he was handed over for a fair and open trial.
Justice has to be patient, doesn't it? Professor David Crane, really appreciate your time today. Thanks very much indeed. A final minute and a final thought from Ella Whelan, who's alongside me. It feels a long way off, doesn't it, if ever?
I know, but the important thing that Professor Crane there mentioned was the right political moment. And while anyone watching the scenes of what's happening in Ukraine, I think no one would argue that this, whether or not it's a war crime, is certainly extremely immoral and wrong what's happening to the people of Ukraine and what Putin is doing. But in the context of political leaders with a lot of weight like Joe Biden calling him a war criminal, puts puts Putin and puts indeed Ukraine and Zelensky in a particular position. You could argue in a worse position, because what is the likelihood of any kind of compromise or any kind of peace talks if you have an international stage that seems to be pushing Putin into a corner? And the political, as well as the kind of legal question of what's going on here, I think what's more important is the political question at this time. And I think we should be taking a lead from what the Ukrainian leader wants rather than what Joe Biden says on a platform.
Ella, for now, thanks very much indeed. It's 5 o'clock. And coming up live at 5, why did America's best-selling plane fall out of the sky this morning, killing all 130 on board and puzzling aviation experts the world over? Also, is the long-awaited COVID public inquiry overlooking the damaging effects of the pandemic on children? Campaigners claim it is. We'll talk to one of them. And the Queen installs a Highland stair lift. Speculation mounts that our monarch intends to make a move to Scotland to see out her retirement. Alongside me throughout the next hour, the author Ella Whelan. But first, we have the headlines with Tamsin.
Colin, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 5 o'clock. Here are the headlines from the GB newsroom. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe says she should have been freed 6 years ago. Speaking for the first time publicly since being released, the British Iranian questioned why it took 5 secretaries of state for her to be released. She also said the meaning of freedom to her will not be complete until Morad Tabaz and other dual nationals are reunited with their families. The British Iranian landed back in Britain last Thursday after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s.
I was told many times that, oh, we're going to get you home. That never happened. So there was a time that I felt like, do you know what? I'm like, no, I'm not even going to trust you, because I've been told many times that I'm going to be taken home. But that never happened. I mean, how many foreign secretaries does it take for someone to come home? 5? It should have been one of them eventually. So now here we are. What's happened now should have happened 6 years ago.
President Zelensky says Ukraine could never surrender Kiev, Mariupol or Kharkiv to Russia. It comes as Ukrainian troops refuse to surrender in the port city of Mariupol, which is surrounded by Russian forces. Russia had given fighters in the city until 5 a.m. this morning to lay down their weapons in exchange for safe passage out, but they refused. Thousands of residents remain trapped with little food, power or water. Ukraine's Defence Minister, Oleksiy Reznikov, says Russia is conducting state terrorism.
Thousands and thousands of civilians were killed. Russia is now committing a real act of genocide against the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. For 3 weeks, 400,000 citizens have been surrounded, without food, water, light, heat.
Meanwhile, in the Ukrainian city of Kherson, CCTV footage has captured the moment Russian troops opened fire on protesters to disperse them. Ukraine's armed forces say stun grenades and gunfire were used to disperse hundreds of civilians taking part in the rally. Russia did not immediately comment on the incident. Detectives investigating alleged lockdown-busting parties held in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office have begun interviewing witnesses. The Prime Minister is one of over 100 people who were asked to fill out a questionnaire under caution as part of Operation Hillman. The Met Police says as a result of responses so far, further individuals have been identified and questionnaires sent to them. As yet, no referrals have been made for the issuing of fixed penalty notices. A man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had researched and planned potential attacks on other politicians, including at the home of Cabinet Minister Michael Gove, a court has heard today. The Conservative MP for Southend West was meeting with constituents in a church building in Leigh-on-Sea in Essex last October when he was fatally stabbed. Ali Harbi Ali has appeared at the Old Bailey and denies murder and preparing terrorist acts. Protests are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O Ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O Ferries to pause the changes and says it's examining the contracts it holds with them. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps says there is no excuse for the way the company has acted.
It was deeply concerning to see the footage of staff being forcibly removed from ferries, underlining a very cynical approach and confrontational nature of the entire operation. And it's astounding, Madam Deputy Speaker, that a company with a long and proud maritime past, and a company whose vessels bear names like the Pride of Kent and the Spirit of Britain, will in future have almost no British crew on board.
State media in China are reporting there's no sign of survivors from a plane that crashed in the country with 132 people on board. The Boeing 737 jet crashed into mountains in the southern province of Guangxi, causing a fire on the mountainside. Media have quoted firefighters saying there was no sign of life among the scattered debris. China Eastern Airlines say the cause of the crash is under investigation. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens, of course. Now, though, it's back to Brazier.
Good afternoon. It is 5:05. I was hoping to give you some encouraging news today. The weather's so nice after all, isn't it? But we start with this story instead. New record prices for fuel this weekend. The average price of petrol was 167p a litre on Sunday. That's according to figures from Experian Catalyst. Diesel, it now averages 179p a litre. The continuing surge in prices comes amid plummeting wholesale costs, leading perhaps inevitably to criticism of the big retailers. Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, expected to cut fuel duty by at least 5p in his spring statement. It's this Wednesday. Let's turn to the Chief Operating Officer at the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA. That's Andy Mair. Andy, thanks so much for your time. What are you expecting on Wednesday?
So the 5p cut in fuel duty will be extremely welcome if it happens. And what we need to understand here is this isn't really a tax cut. It's just the Chancellor agreeing that he doesn't get the bonus in tax that he would otherwise get from this huge rise in fuel prices that we've seen over the last 6 months. So every time price goes up by about £6 for you, £1 goes to the Chancellor just on VAT alone. And that's really what he's giving back by cutting fuel duty, albeit indirectly, through the funny way that this all works. So otherwise, on Wednesday, we're hoping that there's going to be a pause, or pause for reflection, at least on the higher tax rises on NIC particularly, national insurance contributions. That would raise about 12 billion if it doesn't change. And we think that the government's going to consider raising the point at which that starts. So that could drop it a bit. But at the moment, the Chancellor is still quite committed to raising taxes now, we assume, so he can give some back later on when the public finances have been healed.
And it's always really useful when somebody reminds us just how much of the cost of what you put in your car, your van, whatever it is taken by the Treasury. I was talking to a farmer recently who reminded me what he pays for red diesel. It's not quite a fraction of what the rest of us pay, but it is a reminder of how much goes in fuel duty. Assuming we get this 5p cut, what does that say about our relationship now with the fuel duty escalator, this direct linkage for environmental reasons of an extra levy on what we put into our cars and vans, etc.?
Well, we have to hope it's dead, because it hasn't moved for about 11 years. And it hasn't moved because if you consider fuel duty to be an environmental tax, and just to be clear, it isn't, but it's as good as, then the price of fuel duty has massively been the highest carbon price in the economy. So the RAC estimate it's about £200 to £250 a tonne of CO2 emitted. And if you look at the market price of carbon at the moment, it's only about £40 to £80, so 3 to 4 times what it should be. Now, the government are changing the way they calculate what carbon price there should be at the moment. So they're trying to push it up to say that this is actually quite fair. But really, for a very long time, motorists have been stung from the environmental costs that are way beyond the actual impact of cars from petrol and diesel.
And in terms of who this assuming we get the 5p cut per litre, Andy, I mean, that affects everybody equally, doesn't it? So would that qualify as a regressive tax cut?
It's quite complicated, so it's not quite true to say that petrol and diesel impact the poorest the most, because the very poorest in society don't have access to cars and vans. It's actually hard-working people who are involved in the trade in carrying things around. So your Amazon drivers, for example, or people who do long-distance driving, who suffer the most when these things go up. So in a way, this tax cut's quite useful in terms of helping those people who do the most to contribute to the infrastructure of the economy. So it's a very positive tax move in that way, but the distributional impacts are actually quite complicated. And you'll see different effects in different parts of the economy, depending more on jobs than on income levels.
Andy Mayer, good to talk to you. I know you're going to be very busy, I'm sure, on Wednesday, if not today, and tomorrow as well. Thanks very much indeed. Ella Whelan is alongside me to ponder on this one. It's something people are feeling in their pockets on every forecourt up and down the land right now.
Yes, and you only have to cast your mind back a few months, really, to remember the scenes that we saw at petrol stations across the country in relation to the energy crisis that we were talking. You know, they say that a week is a long time in politics, but so much has happened in the last few months. You have to remind yourself that we did have a very serious energy crisis a number of months ago. And indeed, whatever about this 5p fuel tax cut, the bigger question, and the economist Phil Mullen makes this for Rishi Sunak, is what is he going to do? What are the long-term plans for making sure that there aren't instances like this in the future? Because the problem is that it's not that there are instances of individual crises or that there are shortages, but it's that people and indeed the Treasury and the economy is at such a low point that it can't handle any kind of pressure on it. And the point Phil Mullen makes is that rather than penny pinching here and giving a little bit back there, what Rishi Sunak could do and should do if he really wanted to be innovative around this is talk about the history of the British economy, the dearth and the dirges that it's been in for such a long time, and do something innovative to change that. The government has blamed the cost of living crisis and fuel rises and all the rest of it recently on the pandemic or on problems in Europe, and now on the war in Ukraine, and that's not good enough. We know that the reasons and the consequences for why this is happening are homegrown. They're not to be blamed on things happening on the global stage.
He's not going to lift the moratorium on fracking, sadly.
No, and they should, and that's a scandal because
and he's even blocking nuclear to some degree, we hear.
And that tells you that a government, I've made this point several times, but our government is trying to get away with normalising the fact that people will be short, that people will be in need. And that is really something in 2022. If a government cannot promise to not only allow people to heat their homes and fill their cars, but to live better lives year on year, to increase and improve the quality of life, then that is not a government that's fit to be in place.
I really want to talk about this plane crash in China overnight, which, when we sort out the tech problems we're having, we will talk to somebody who can explain why it's something that ought to make people sit up a little bit shortly. But in the meantime, we're going to talk about a story that you've written a lot about, Ella. In fact, no, I'm told the tech is working, so let's crack into that. This morning, a Boeing passenger jet was on a normal internal commuter flight in China. There were 123 passengers and 9 crew on board as it flew. Well, I was going to say 29,000 feet. I read that somewhere, 31,000 feet, perhaps not entirely clear. For no apparent reason, the aircraft entered a steep dive. And, these images are distressing on one level because this is the end of 130 lives in a moment, isn't it? But the pictures do show the 737 neither in a tailspin nor breaking up. It looks, according to these pictures, in one piece. And it appears there really arrowing towards the Earth, almost vertically, and indeed at high speed, around 350 miles an hour. It's been suggested, if you are watching on TV rather than listening on the radio, looking at pictures now, the emergency response from the Chinese, pointless as it turned out because everybody died pretty much instantly, but there were some fires that had started locally. The reason for the crash, here we come to it, not yet clear, given that the 737 is, by many measures, the best-selling passenger plane in aviation history. Well, it's a question the travel industry and indeed the flying public everywhere will be looking to answer. Possible causes include, we're told, a high-altitude stall, jammed controls, sensor failure of some description, or whether it's sabotage or terrorism, some type of deliberate act. It's not thought We're told that engine failure caused the crash, given that aircraft can glide some distance without power. The aircraft, it was operated by China Eastern Airways, involved a 737, but not the 737 MAX variant, which was grounded around the world following 2 fatal crashes. Well, aircraft engineering accident investigator Tony Cable joins us now to talk about this. Tony Cable, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Obviously, it goes without saying, it's very early days. This is speculation, and in time we'll know more, we hope. But what initial conclusions, if any, do you draw?
Well, you obviously can't draw conclusions. You can only look at possibilities, plausible possibilities. And as you say, the aircraft was in the cruise, and no, I've seen no indications that there was any message about any abnormality when it apparently lost some speed, whether that was airspeed or ground speed or both, I don't know, and then started a very rapid descent, sort of in the order of 10,000 feet per minute, and impacted the ground at 9,000 plus feet. So, as you say, the possibilities would seem to be some flight control system malfunction, conceivably erroneous operation of the autopilot, and either of these possibly leading to an aerodynamic stall where the flow breaks down over the wings and you lose lift and therefore acquire a rapid descent rate. And there's the usual things like structural failure, collision, hostile action, deliberate action, pilot incapacitation, that sort of thing. It's not, as you say, the MAX, and the thing that caused the problems in Ethiopia and Indonesia was a system that is not on the 737-800, but the 800 does have the basic system that's on all aircraft of a pitch trim system, which adjusts the angle of the tailplane and thereby the nose up, nose down angle of the aircraft. Now, there have been many thousand 737-800s built, and this has not been a problem. So it is maybe a little unlikely that the pitch trim system has contributed, but the basic system is there, as I say, without the added features that were put on for the MAX.
Tony Cable, thanks for your time. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
People aged 75 and over, residents in care homes, and those with weakened immune systems can now book an extra booster jab against COVID. This is in England. It comes as official figures show infection rates rising in all age groups, including the over 70s. The rollout follows recommendations from the UK's vaccine advisors, who say additional jabs will help boost protection for the most vulnerable. Let's turn to NHS GP, Dr. Mo Kaki. Mo Kaki, welcome to you. Appreciate your time as ever. Are we entering the realms of the seasonal flu vaccine here?
We are, yes. I think we have known this for a while. But what we've seen recently is that 1 in 20 people now have COVID-19. And the concern, of course, is that we don't want people who are vulnerable to get sick or become unwell. And therefore, this new vaccine rollout for the a booster program has come into effect. We're going to be sending out letters to 7 million eligible people. And that's anyone who's over 75, anyone who's a care home resident for older adults, or if you're older than 12 and you've got a condition that means you've got a weaker immune system, this would be something that you'd be eligible for.
And I just sense, I mean, you may disagree and you're in a position to, of course, but that sense of urgency with this round boosters compared to where we were around Christmas when it felt like, well, we were in that race against time against Omicron.
You're right. I think it's the fact that we know that during the winter period, viruses are more prevalent. We know that the immune system can be a bit weaker. We know that people can get a bit sicker. And we know that the NHS as well can get more overrun because of all of that. So there was a huge sprint to get as many people boosted as possible so that we could prevent all of that chaos happening. And now, of course, we're into the spring months, we're moving into summer season and hoping that those changes in the weather and the less transmissibility of viruses means that we have less of a burden. But of course, we have seen this increase in rise, and so therefore this initiative has now been taken upon. I mean, the thing to remember is that we have found that the boosters have prevented 157,000 missions since mid-December. So it's been an incredible effort and really been really effective. So if you are someone who's thinking about whether you should get the treatment, I think I would urge you to do so.
Yeah, and nonetheless, though, Doctor, you will get people who will say, OK, 4th jab, there'll be a 5th one, a 6th one, etc., etc., etc. This is not, they will say to you, this is not living with COVID. This is it's medicalised in perpetuity.
Well, I think it's actually looking at it from what the best form of defence is, and the vaccination programme is the best form of defence. We know that we have relaxed restrictions on how people interact, on how people test, but we know that actually those are all methods of detection or prevention of spread. Boosting your immune system to support it with the vaccination is probably the most effective method at the moment for us to protect the populace. So at the moment, that's the methodology. And I think people are right. You know, I don't think this vaccination and the boosters is going away anywhere at the moment. But hey, it's done an incredible job. And that's why it's just about timing it. So right now, because it's on the rise, people's immune systems are weak, we want to target them. But I guess I think the next round really for most of us will be looking in the winter season and preventing that time.
Mo Kaki, appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Ella Whelan alongside me today to reflect on a 4th jab, a 5th jab, and so on.
But, you know, targeted medical intervention like this is normal. I mean, I get the flu jab because I've got asthma, and people, I think, are very used to that. And if this is going to help the elderly or those with immunosuppressant...
well, Mo was just saying anybody over 12. Did I mishear that?
But who are immunocompromised.
Sorry, okay.
But the real question for government now and for the remaining restrictions is why are we still holding up old people in care homes without allowing people to go in without the rigmarole of PPE and all the rest of this? If there is, if we get that, will people have to wait for the 7th, 8th, 9th jab for their lives to go back to normal in those places where it's meant to be their home? One of the greatest scandals of this pandemic has been the treatment of elderly people living in care homes, and that continues to this day, of difficulties of people getting in to be able to see their families despite having all the jabs under the sun.
We've learned this week that what the terms of reference of the public inquiry into COVID will be, and it's interesting that children, the effect on children, is not much mentioned there. We're going to be talking about that a little later on in the course of this hour, Ella. Now, the alleged killer of murdered Tory MP, Sir David Amess, has appeared in court. We'll be talking to GB News' Mark White, who was outside court, who'll bring us the latest on that. But first, the weather.
Hello again, welcome to the latest from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. A dry and bright day for most of us. Cloudier skies in the west compared to how things were at the weekend, but even under those clouds, it's mostly fine. We're on the edge of high pressure. That high pressure is sitting to the east. A southerly airflow is bringing in some areas of cloud. Initially, it's been across western parts of the country, but that cloud overnight drifting east, and then another plume of cloud turning up from the south. And that could give the odd shower to southern parts of England and then later through central areas. However, really, for the vast majority, it's looking dry overnight with clear spells in places, the longest clear spells in the north of Scotland, where temperatures could dip to -3°C by dawn. A chilly start with a touch of frost in places for the start of Tuesday, but for most, it's a bright start. So just this area of medium-level cloud moving north through the Midlands into northern England, and by the afternoon, as temperatures rise, that could set off the odd shower, mainly northern England, North Midlands, southern Scotland. But away from those areas, it's sunny spells, it's staying dry, and temperatures reaching 16 to 18°C fairly widely, 19 or 20 possible London to Cambridge. Then Tuesday night sees any cloud generally fizzle out, and I think with extensive clear spells through the night, a touch of frost is possible in sheltered spots just about anywhere, and a few fog patches as well, predominantly northeast and eastern England. Otherwise, another sunny start to the day on Wednesday. Widespread sunshine, more extensively, I think, compared to Monday and Tuesday. Barely a cloud in the sky in places, once any fog has lifted, of course. And it's going to stay dry virtually everywhere. Thursday brings more cloud to Scotland and Northern Ireland, but sunshine prevails elsewhere. Very similar again on Friday.
Join me, Nana Akweer, on Fridays, Saturdays and Sunday afternoons here on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as my panel and I take on some of the top stories hitting the headlines.
You can look up the statistics.
No, you look it up. I hug everyone. We learn from it and try and move on. That's it. Opinion is at the heart of the show. It's a place for open and frank conversation, but without the fear of cancellation. So join me here on GB News on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons between 4 and 6 p.m.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate
from all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
that you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
Basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
and I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Now, the trial of an alleged terrorist who's accused of murdering Sir David Amess is underway. The Conservative MP for Southend West was killed during a constituency surgery in October. Let's turn to GB News' Home and Security editor, Mark White, who joins us from the Old Bailey. Mark.
Colin, yes, we're just over 5 months since the death of Sir David Amess, and now Ali Harbi Ali, a 26-year-old from North London, is in the dock here at Court Number 2 at the Old Bailey, accused of the murder of this Conservative MP. According to Tom Little, the prosecuting counsel, in his opening remarks today, he said this was nothing less than an assassination for terrorist purposes. It is a crime to which we say he has no defence. He goes on to say this is a case involving cold and calculated murder, a murder carried out in a place of worship, a murder carried out because of a warped and twisted and violent ideology. Well, the motive, according to the Crown, was revenge for the bombing of Syria, something that, according to the prosecution, Ali Harbi Ali actually admitted to those inside that Methodist church hall in Leigh-on-Sea on the 15th of October, just after he had stabbed Sir David Amess. Also, he had sent text messages to his friends and family, again saying as much. Now, the prosecution say that the the terrorist plot had been some years in the planning. In fact, it was 5 years ago, they say, that he purchased the murder weapon. Also, as far back as May of 2019, he was looking at other politicians to target, according to the Crown. They included Mike Freer, Conservative MP, and also the Cabinet Minister Michael Gove. And with regard to Michael Gove, he had gone as far as to jot down specifics about how he might carry out this attack on his note app within his smartphone, saying that during the day, if there were press outside Mr. Gove's home, that he would wait with the press until Michael Gove came out. Also, that he might bump into Michael Gove while he's out jogging. That would be ideal, he said. Also, if the attack was to take place at night, he said that he would try to commit some kind of scene outside of Mr. Gove's house to draw him out, or even kick in his door, noting that his door opened inwards. All the prosecution says damning evidence that points to the fact that he was planning a terrorist attack for some significant years.
Thanks very much indeed. Mark White there at the Old Bailey. Just a line from the Metropolitan Police, and those of you who followed the raging debate, and I think it is still raging, the conversation nationally about e-scooters. Whenever there's a serious injury or fatality, we try and bring that to bear on this conversation. The Met Police say a teenage girl has died after her e-scooter collided with a van this afternoon. The Met said officers were called to reports of a crash in Newham around 1:35. The girl believed to be 14 years of age who died of injuries she sustained in that crash on an e-scooter. Coming up, we're going to be looking at the COVID inquiry and its terms of reference and what ultimately we'll find out about COVID we don't know already. But first, let's bring you the rest of the news with Tamsin.
Thank you, Colin. It's 5:31. Here are the latest headlines from the GB newsroom. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe has thanked those involved in her release after spending 6 years detained in Iran. But she refused to thank the Foreign Secretary. Ms Zaghari-Ratcliffe landed back in Britain last week after the UK finally agreed to settle a £400 million debt dating back to the 1970s. A group of Ukrainian orphans due to fly to the UK are stuck in Poland after a key piece of paperwork was not provided in time. The 52 young travellers, who are aged between 1 and 18, were due to arrive in London today before heading to Scotland later in the week. However, the Ukrainian government failed to provide the correct paperwork to Polish officials. It's now believed the flight will not take place before Wednesday. A man on trial for the murder of MP Sir David Amess had researched and planned potential attacks on other politicians, including cabinet ministers, a court has heard today. Ali Harbi Ali has appeared at the Old Bailey and denies the allegations of murder and preparing terrorist acts. Detectives investigating alleged lockdown-busting parties held in Downing Street and the Cabinet Office have begun interviewing key witnesses. The Prime Minister is one of over 100 people who were asked to fill out a questionnaire under caution as part of Operation Hillman. As yet, no referrals have been made for the issuing of fixed penalty notices. Protests are taking place in London against the sacking of 800 P&O Ferries workers. Labour is forcing an emergency vote in Parliament today, which they hope will outlaw fire and rehire practices after the operator replaced staff with cheaper agency workers. The government has urged P&O Ferries to pause the changes and say it's examining the contracts it holds with them. Chinese state media say no foreigners were on board the China Eastern Airlines flight that crashed in the southern province of Guangxi. 132 people were on board the Boeing 737, which was en route from the southwestern city of Kunming. State media in China report there is no sign of survivors. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News. Back to Brazier in just a moment.
GB News is the UK's home of discussion and debate.
From all perspectives.
To stay up to date on the latest stories,
Make sure that you subscribe to the GB News channel.
right here on YouTube.
You can watch us live 24/7 across the whole world.
You can also check out exclusive content and catch up on previous episodes of your favourite shows.
Every day, we ask the questions
That you'd ask, so why not add your voice to the conversation in the comments section?
Don't forget to subscribe. We are GB News, Britain's news channel.
Every night at 11 on GB News, we bring you the next day's stories the day before.
It's basically like time travel.
If it's a big story, we'll cover it, guaranteed. But we'll also have some fun along the way.
Big opinions, big laughs. Sometimes big hair.
This is
Headliners, the paper review show that won't send you to sleep like the others will.
11 p.m, 7 nights a week. Join us.
Hello there, I'm Eamon Holmes.
And I'm Isabel Webster.
And we hope you can join us for
Breakfast with Eamon.
And Isabel.
You make me laugh out loud, belly laugh.
Is that important first thing in the morning?
Yeah, absolutely.
And there's me trying to be deadly serious. News is a serious business.
Yeah, I have to rein you in sometimes.
Well, it doesn't stop us laughing at it. It doesn't stop us having an opinion on what's going on.
Yeah.
And it certainly will not stop us reflecting what you think.
Weekdays from 6 to 9:30 on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
In a moment, we'll talk about this big public inquiry into COVID, its causes, how we cope with it, all the rest of it. But I just want to flag up briefly with Ella Whelan, who's my studio guest this afternoon, this news from the Metropolitan Police today. A 14-year-old girl has died on an e-scooter after a collision with a van. Awful story for some poor family in London today who have to pick up the pieces of their lives as a consequence of this. I can't think at the moment, certainly over the last year, of another story which generates as much heat as e-scooters. It produces a massive influx whenever we debate the rights and wrongs of using them. What do you think?
Well, it's obviously true that people, and indeed young people, die from collisions on bicycles. And road safety is important, whatever means of transport you're using. But the thing about e-scooters is that they're not regulated in the same way that bikes are, or indeed even mopeds are. Things that can go at the speed that they can go at is quite frightening. And there's also the question of the fact that people, because they're unregulated, people use them on the pavement, on the road, and there's no clear distinction. Unlike, kids get bike safety lessons in school, you get taught how to use the road, you get taught how to manage other vehicles, and it's not the same with e-scooters. I personally hate them. I think they're a real menace, particularly when they're used on the pavement. But if we're going to allow new technology, which is exciting in many ways in terms of getting people around the city quicker, to be introduced into society and used as in the same way that bikes or cars are used, it has to be regulated properly.
And it's got to be policed. And from what I gather, the police have just given up. And I don't blame them, actually, because the government's just decided it's a problem it can't deal with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the thing about the police being able to tackle them is that if there is this blurred line between whether they are sort of the equivalent of a kind of a skateboard in terms of not being regulated, or whether they are classed as a vehicle on the road, that will give the police more ability to.
Well, I hate to say it, but sadly, it's going to be deaths like this which make people look up and think, is this something we want to pursue, as if there is no consequence. 14-year-old girl dying after a collision between an e-scooter that she was on and a van in London today. Now, the public inquiry into COVID has disappointed some groups which took up the cause of children in lockdown by not mentioning children in its aims. The newly published draft terms of reference for the inquiry have been accused, can you accuse draft guidelines? I'm not sure, of a shocking oversight. Molly Kingsley, co-founder of parents campaign group Us For Them, is calling for a separate children's inquiry to be conducted. Molly Kingsley joins me, as you see. There are those, Molly, who will say public inquiries are a hugely expensive and time-consuming way of providing answers to questions. And to set up a separate inquiry looking at the impact on children would be to incur further expense and waste more time.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think however it's done, the point here is that the substance of an inquiry, if we're going to do an inquiry, has to include the impact on children. And I think, like many others, I was shocked when we've been, our parents and in our group are just appalled that we have terms of reference that don't mention the word child once. So, in a way, the form, is it part of this inquiry? Is it a separate inquiry? Maybe is less important than the fact if this is to be anything other than yet another huge waste of public funds. It has to look at the impact on children, because as we know, children were the group least impacted by the virus itself, but really have borne the greatest burden.
And for those people scratching their heads thinking, why does this matter? Well, it matters hugely, doesn't it? Because the public inquiry, yes, it's looking in the rearview mirror at what happened, but part of that process is to look ahead to what you do should something like this, heaven forfend, happen again. And part of its calibration of risk and benefit has to factor in, as you say, the impact on children.
I think that's exactly right, Colin. I mean, it is the essence of good government that government acts reasonably and proportionately, even in an emergency situation. And if we're not looking at the costs to children, how can we possibly know if this was a reasonable reaction and one that should be repeated? And I think the other thing here is we do know, unfortunately, that the costs for many children were really huge. And actually, I think in some cases, particularly around safeguarding and around school closures, there are real questions to be answered about, whether what we saw was a reasonable response and actually the need to protect children should this ever happen again. I mean, I don't think we would want to repeat some of, the actions of the last 2 years. We know that children have sadly lost their lives as a result of lockdown and some of the measures. So, let's be honest about that and let's try and learn lessons, which is what the inquiry says it wants to do.
When it comes to lessons, I mean, there's a way of looking at this institutionally, whether that's the way the Department for Education was run, but more specifically some schools and maybe even the role played by some teaching unions who at times, it will seem to some parents, I include myself, haven't been as keen to champ at the bit of education as they could have been.
Yeah, and I think actually you've made a really good point here as well, because I think, as the terms of reference of the inquiry, they do, to be fair, they talk about restrictions in education. That's the only reference. And actually there's this misconception, isn't there, that, the only point at which children's lives were touched over the last 2 years was in education. Now, obviously, that is true, and everything you've just said needs to be looked at. But we mustn't forget that children have lives outside of school. And, if you look at the terms of this inquiry as they now stand, we would have nothing on babies. We would have nothing on the wider impacts on children that happened outside of school. So, for example, the restrictions on social interaction, some of the other interventions that happened out of a school context, which were arguably just as limiting and have had just as big an impact. And I think the other thing, Colin, is we need to be honest that if, we hear a lot that children are resilient, that may be true for some children and some impacts, but to stand them in the best stead to recover, we need to understand exactly where they're at now.
Yeah, there's a lot to think about there, but Molly Kingsley, really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Ella Whelan alongside me, listening to that. And just Molly's final point about the need to reflect on how COVID affected kids, not just in the classroom but elsewhere. It's really difficult for people haven't got kids, don't always register this necessarily. I look at my 3 middle kids in particular, for whom, short of losing their mother to cancer, think of what happened during lockdown as pretty much the most profound experience of their lives. Mm. And in lots of respects, they think it was, I don't want to use the word fantastic. They were pushed together. And their relationship, which was already close, got even closer because they were just at home with each other all the time. Mm. And they would say, God, Dad, imagine being an only child.
Mm. And I think we shouldn't shy away from, not to celebrate the points of the pandemic, but to some of the outcomes of the pandemic, like that families reconnecting is something that happened and is something to celebrate. The flip side of that is obviously the only child who's stuck at home with the single mum, for example, and people who can't cope. And I think Molly's really right to talk about the fact that there are serious questions in relation to education. I mean, for example, it's not just you don't whip yourself for not being that keen on the homeschooling, Colin. It's also the fact that if you have a large number of kids and all of them have got a Zoom class at 2 o'clock, how are you going to manage that with, an average person has one computer in the home. People don't have the kind of broadband that can withstand that. All those details. But there's also just the simple fact of, for example, my cousin had his daughter was a baby at the beginning of lockdown. 2 years of being attached really only to her mum and dad and not having any kind of socialisation did have an effect on her. Now, Molly's right to say kids are resilient. They do bounce back. That's the great thing about kids, is that even if they do have a terrible 2 years, if you give them the right amount of love and resources, they will bounce back. The important question is how we handle this in the future. We should not be shutting schools in the future. We should not be shutting kids away from being able to go out and socialise in parks and things like that. Even in emergency situations, all of that does need to be protected in some way. Those freedoms need to be protected if we actually really care about child development.
And let's hope we don't need the findings of a public inquiry, but it's better to be prepared, isn't it? That's for sure. Ella, for now, thanks very much indeed. Now, a former royal chaplain says that hot cross buns with ingredients such as chocolate, cheese and caramel may be, quote, the devil at work. Dr. Gavin Ashenden said the indulgent extras distract us from the seasonal treats' religious symbolism, Christian symbolism. Hot cross buns were intended as a deliberately austere and bland food apt for Lent. In quotes, it's not an accident they have been warped, said Gavin, and he suggested that it could be taken as a sign of the devil at work. Just before Gavin joins us, I ought to say, and apologies if this is the devil at work, but we normally fight shy of props. We couldn't help ourselves today, Ella. We've got some extremely chocolatey hot cross buns, which I'll fight you for later. Let's turn to Dr. Gavin Ashenden, who joins us now. Doctor, thanks for your time. The devil at work, yes, but the point about Lent is it's meant to be a period of fasting, abstinence and putting aside the pleasures of the flesh.
Yes, Colin, I had a lovely conversation with a Sikh reporter who asked me a number of questions about hot cross buns, and we had quite an extended theological discussion in which the devil appeared for reasons I can explain. But of course, because she wanted some decent copy, she rearranged the words and put them in a quote that I don't quite recognise.
I'm sure journalists never do that, Doctor.
Of course they don't, and so it's very helpful to be able to put the record straight a little bit. I think the question was, does it matter that hot cross buns are being turned into a sort of a piece of capitalist gluttony or not? And in one sense, it doesn't matter very much with people dying in a war and P&O ferry employees losing their jobs, but it might matter. It matters a little bit in an obesity crisis. It's silly to take something that was relatively healthy and turn into something quite gluttonous. But it matters in the sense that there's a degree of cultural appropriation going on. I was talking to a famous talk show host, a competitor, I won't mention her name today, as a famous atheist. She said she had no idea that hot cross buns had anything to do with Jesus' death on the cross. No. And so the problem is that we're losing a Christian culture and replacing it with one that's completely ignorant of Christianity. And the reason that matters is I think there's some really wonderful virtues in Christian culture, including loving your neighbour as yourself and forgiving your enemies. And in a world racked with conflict, I think Christianity teaches us about the origins of good and evil and stands in particular in contrast to the ideas produced by Rousseau, which drive the whole rest of the left, which is that human beings are a blank canvas and can be written on to improve them in any way by passing laws or giving them education. I think the struggle between good and evil is a great deal different for that, and that's one of the things that Christianity brings to the table, and that's where the devil has got to mention.
Yeah. Gavin, just to correct you, I never have a problem with our rival broadcasters being identified for not knowing something. We'd rather enjoy that. We'll put that to one side and not name the guilty party. Do you get annoyed at all when the Christian traditions from within the Christian calendar, the idea of, whether it's fasting for Advent or fasting for Lent, almost sort of, or even, fish on Fridays, not eating meat on a Friday, then become sort of detached from their Christian meaning and given a new secular purpose, whether it's Dry January or, you know, the day of the week when you don't eat meat? Is it? I mean, I suppose imitation is a kindest form of flattery on one level, but it's hard to overestimate the amount of religious illiteracy that's out there about those things, that these things used to exist within the calendar with a Christian purpose.
We had to, when I was a university lecturer, we had to stop teaching Shakespeare and Chaucer because the kids who came had no idea of the biblical imagery or narrative behind. It doesn't make me angry, it makes me sad, I think, because the reason I'm a Christian is that I think there are enormous virtues to the Christian understanding of life. And they're being let go, I think, because Christians have been too frightened or lazy or upset. The reason this conversation happened was my reporter was a Sikh. And I was talking about the way in which I admire Sikhs, so the gutsy, punchy way they defend the values of their own religion. And I was lamenting the fact that Christians have just rather, I don't better choose my words carefully. I think we've been irresponsible in the way in which we've let the truth, the narrative, the richness and the resources of Christianity simply slip away because the secular alternatives don't work very well. And I mean, I could give you a long list of ways in which that might be the case, but that would take us too long in the evening.
Well, Gavin, we'll book you in for another occasion, perhaps closer to Easter, but really appreciate your time today. Thanks ever so much for explaining all that so lucidly. Thanks very much indeed. Gavin Ashenden.
Thank you.
Ella Whelan's alongside me. Are you a God-botherer like me?
No, I was brought up Catholic, but I'm, for political reasons now, a firm non-believer, and I do, you know, I'm a Rousseau fan. But you know, I'm
well,
also
a big. You're not having these. Then.
I'm also
That's
a big fan of. I'm a fan of. Well, the question is whether they're tainted enough for a non-God botherer like me to be able to have them. But I'm a big fan of cultural appropriation, and as much as I think that we should be able to muck around with yoga and different kinds of music, you know, there is no reason why religion shouldn't be bothered with, whether it be Hot Cross Buns or anything else. But the doctor made a very important point, which is the fact that Christianity, for various reasons, has become something of a, not quite a dirty word, but people do feel embarrassed about talking about their faith, and particularly for literature and Chaucer and so much of Western literature has been influenced by Christianity. That's a really big problem, because whether or not I believe in God is one thing, but the respect I have for Christianity and the history of it in terms of what it contributed to the arts as well as other religions is you don't have to get on your knees and pray to appreciate the wonder that religion does give to other aspects of life. And I think it's a shame if we lose that. Look at
the number of phrases from the King James Bible that we use in everyday conversation, and actually how much richer your knowledge is of our language if you can understand those biblical references. There's a lot to talk about there, but not for now. Ella, for now, thanks very much. It was reported at the weekend that a stair lift had been installed at the Queen's Balmoral home, along with some extra security, things like more CCTV and some automatic gates. The work has been done, or will be done, not on the big famous house that people think of when they hear of Balmoral, but the smaller Craiggown house, where the Queen's late husband, Prince Philip, and Her Majesty are said to have spent happy days. Cosmopolitan magazine reported today that the monarch, who recently appeared in public using a walking stick, will see out her retirement in Scotland. Let's turn to a former royal correspondent and writer, Charles Ray, who joins me now. Hello to you, Charlie. Retirement in Scotland?
No, I think retirement's a very strange word when you're talking about the Queen. Look, the Queen has taken an oath. She's going to be our monarch. She'll be our monarch till the end of her days. But what is true is that she wants to spend a bit more time in Scotland. It always amazes me and gives me a little smile when people talk about the smaller place. This is a 7-bedroom cottage, so it's quite a large place. And as you quite rightly said, it's now getting an upgrade. It's having a lift installed, which can take a wheelchair if necessary. And that's not to say that the Queen is going to use a wheelchair, but it's going to make it easier for her to get from downstairs to upstairs to her bedroom.
Charles, I always feel, I was going to say to you, where does she prefer to be? But these questions are always it's a bit like, this assertion that people assert that Prince Andrew was the Queen's favourite child.
Yes.
We just don't know. We don't know, do we? We don't know where her favourite place is.
This phrase about Prince Andrew in particular, I've never been able to find the source of where it's come from, the favourite son. And it's like, when every so often we hear about, Windsor's her favourite place. No, it's Sandringham. She only uses Buckingham Palace as the office, which she's not going to use anymore. Now it's Scotland. I think she has an affinity with Scotland. There is no question about that. And it's not unusual for her to spend a bit more time. But when some people talk about retirement, I think they're jumping the gun quite a bit there. I don't think the Queen's going to announce any retirement at any time soon.
Charles, we're almost out of time, but appreciate yours as ever. Charles Ray joining us there. Thanks very much indeed, Charles. Ella Whelan's alongside me. Just to wrap up today's show, I want to go back to Little Britain. I've got a couple of emails on this. Stuart says, how ridiculous is this, the story being that Little Britain has been re-released, but with some, in quotes, offensive bits taken out. I will not watch Little Britain again until they put it back 100% to how it was made originally. Well, Stuart may or may not do that, but it's back on our screens. And the point I was going to make about Little Britain, and it's a generational divide, by the way. I think anybody under 25 sort of hasn't heard of Little Britain, actually. But it was amazingly prescient in some of the trends it identified and lampooned.
It was, you know, you have to remember that it was hugely popular. I was in Year 7 when it came out, 2003, and the lines I remember being repeated on the playground weren't the really contentious political stuff in relation to blackface or any of the kind of political commentary. It was the stupid thing about the actor who wanted to sing his own theme tune and a bit of Vicky Pollard and that kind of thing. And I think people have to understand that the reason why it was so popular wasn't necessarily because of the political commentary. It was because it was a shocking thing. You had, you know, men asking for breast milk. You had people puking at bake sales. You had all this kind of... It was just like, how far can you go? And that is a significant, you know, factor of comedy, of pushing boundaries. Whether or not you're a fan of Little Britain, the suggestion that taking out a sketch here or a sketch there would sort of satiate the desire of the kind of onward desire of cancel culture to continuously find more and more offence in everything is ludicrous. I think Lucas and Williams have really made a mistake here, because the whole point about cancel culture as offence is it's completely subjective.
Fantastic.
And if you stop one person, it'll be another person upset.
Got to leave it there. Ella Whelan, thanks very much indeed. More news coming up.
Hello again. Welcome to the latest from the Met Office. I'm Aidan McGivern. A dry and bright day for most of us. Cloudier skies in the west compared to how things were at the weekend. But even under those clouds, it's mostly fine. We're on the edge of high pressure. That high pressure is sitting to the east. A southerly airflow is bringing in some areas of cloud. Initially, it's been across western parts of the country, but that cloud overnight drifting east, and then another plume of cloud turning up from the south. And that could give the odd shower to southern parts of England and then later through central areas. However, really, for the vast majority, it's looking dry overnight with clear spells in places, the longest clear spells in the north of Scotland, where temperatures could dip to -3 by dawn. A chilly start with a touch of frost in places for the start of Tuesday, but for most, it's a bright start. So just this area of medium-level cloud moving north through the Midlands into northern England, and by the afternoon, as temperatures rise, that could set off the odd shower, mainly northern England, North Midlands, southern Scotland. But away from those areas, it's sunny spells, it's staying dry, and temperatures reaching 16 to 18 Celsius fairly widely, 19 or 20 possible London to Cambridge. Then Tuesday night sees any cloud generally fizzle out, and I think with extensive clear spells through the night, a touch of frost is possible in sheltered spots just about anywhere, and a few fog patches as well, predominantly northeast and eastern England. Otherwise, another sunny start to the day on Wednesday. Widespread sunshine, more extensively, I think, compared to Monday and Tuesday. Barely a cloud in the sky in places, once any fog has lifted, of course. And it's going to stay dry virtually everywhere. Thursday brings more cloud to